Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today to learn about the top 5 pitfalls practice owners make with HR compliance. I am your host and lead HR specialist, Sasha Wojak. The healthcare industry regularly faces HR compliance updates, and with the added variable of COVID-19, the rules and regulations have only become even more complicated and difficult to keep up with. So today, during this webinar, HR for Health co-founder and renowned employment attorney, Alia Romshian, will walk you through all of these common pitfalls and how to avoid them. Ali will explain exactly what you need to know in order to be in compliance and avoid legal trouble. So throughout this webinar today, if you have any questions, please feel free to put that in the chat and we will do our best at the end of this webinar to go ahead and give you some answers. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn this presentation over to Ali.
Awesome. Thank you, Sasha. Hi, everyone. So I'm excited to be doing this seminar again because we haven't really done one of these on this topic really since COVID began. This was one of our most popular seminars that we used to do live because it was going in depth in terms of the things that we most commonly see in all of our clients, either at the law firm or at HR for Health nationally. And so these pitfalls are not some theoretical things that are hard to keep in mind or hard to do, but rather these are the issues that are getting our doctors in trouble. And so it's a really action-packed, information-packed seminar with a lot of good detail that you can use almost immediately in your practice. So we're going to jump into that very shortly. Now, as most of you know, the difference between success and failure, especially in your practices, sometimes comes down to millimeters. And the reality is that HR is very similar to that in the sense that it's all about the little details that make the biggest difference when it comes to compliance or non-compliance. Now, as the practice owner or the office manager, if that's who's attending the webinar today, the ultimate responsibility of the things that happen in your office lay on you. Now, I know sometimes it's hard for us to admit to that or maybe acknowledge that or and sometimes we don't even want it, we don't desire it, right? We don't want the responsibility. But if you're going to take the praise for how well your office is doing, then you also have to take the criticism that comes with how maybe the office is not working as efficiently as it should. And so it's really important to acknowledge that, so that as you are given this information today, you can create an action plan to become compliant. These are really detailed things that we have uncovered have gotten our clients in trouble. But the good news is that they're easy to rectify, right? They're easy to rectify, and our team at the law firm or HR for Health is there to really support you and help you through it. So they're not hard. They just need your attention. But the primary objective today is to tell you about them, because if you don't know what these problems are or what these pitfalls are, it's impossible to fix it, right? It's impossible to fix it. So we're going to go into great detail about that and talk about the 5 most common. Now, as most of you know, I am a dental attorney. My wife is a pediatric dentist here in the East Bay, and so I kind of bounce between both worlds, right? I obviously have thousands and thousands of customers and clients between HR for Health and the law firm, where we help every day with HR issues. But more importantly, I also see these things in real life with my wife's own practice. And so I bring a really unique perspective to these discussions, because I know that it's sometimes hard to implement some of the things that we recommend, and that sometimes you're going to get pushback from employees or you're going to get pushback from management. But that's okay, right? That's okay. The part that is my responsibility is to educate you on the things that you need to know. Your job is to rely on folks like us or on others to help you kind of achieve those results. And so we that's why we get into detail about these, and more importantly, it's the reason why we do these a lot. For those of you that don't know me, I am a healthcare attorney. We help dentists, optometrists, veterinarians, and other doctors with various aspects of their offices, from practice transitions to employment contracts to lease renegotiations, partnerships, of course HR, and estate planning as well. And so we bring all of those into a lot of our webinars that we do. But today we're focusing on public enemy number one in healthcare, which is HR. So here's how today's seminar is going to be broken down. We're going to first talk about why HR compliance is not just a nice to have, but it's a must have. So we're going to go through that. Then we're going to go through the 5 top HR mistakes that we have uncovered and that you may be facing as well. And then what do you do if you're at risk, right? What are your options there? How are you going to, minimize your risk profile, as we call it? And then finally, if we have some time, we're going to go through some Q&A at the end and answer any questions that may be posed today. All right, so let's jump into it. What is HR compliance? What is HR compliance? Well, this is kind of a loaded question because historically, HR compliance was really just about creating an employment manual. And the idea was, look, if I have an employment manual, I don't need anything else. I am good to go. But as we know, that's not enough. An employment manual is one part of a bigger puzzle that is your HR compliance. And the reality is that you need to have the employment manual plus a lot of the other things that we're going to talk about today. But some of you may not even have a manual, which again, we'll get to. But the reality is that things have changed, not since COVID, but really in the last 10 years, things have changed. And HR has become a vital part of every one of our practices. And of course, we've always relied on team members to do what they need to do. Without your team, you can't do anything that you're doing in your practice. You can't be the best doctor you can, without a strong, front office team, without a strong back office team. Whether those are, nurses, hygienists, RDAs, opticians. It doesn't matter, who they are, or technicians. These are folks that are helping you achieve what you need to achieve. Well, the focus on HR law has grown, and now it's not just a nice to have, like if I get to it, I'm gonna get HR compliant. It's an absolute must have. And the reason it's become a must have is because in the last 10 years, but particularly in the last 5 years, laws have changed drastically and swayed drastically towards being more employee friendly, as many of you know, because you're in states that have these very friendly laws. And now some states are more friendly than others, like California is way more friendly than Texas, for example, towards the employees. But still, even a state like Texas has, laws that have changed and are becoming more employee friendly. So when we think about HR, sometimes we think of it strictly as making sure that, the employees are happy or that we're recruiting, but really it's more than that. It's really about making sure that you have all the foundational things you need from a legal perspective so that if trouble comes up, you're protected, right? You're protected because you have a strong foundation. And also, when you have that strong foundation, the chance of misinterpretation from the employees regarding their benefits, regarding their pay, regarding your obligations to them, their obligations to you, all those things kind of go by the wayside because you are HR compliant. You've done the steps that you need to do to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So that's that component. Now, the other component, which is really much more real in a sense that this is what's causing a lot of lawsuits, a lot of administrative, whether federal or state, is that the laws at the federal, state, and sometimes even local levels have changed so much that they require you to spend particularly more attention on HR. For example, a lot of states now have what's called sick leave. Well, that in of itself requires you to provide paid sick leave to some employees. I get that. But the reason it's become more important is because there's rules where you have to track that benefit, right, the sick leave benefit in real time, right? You have to track it as they go. And so many of you are not doing that or not providing that. And so that's a level of liability. That's just one of many things that has caused HR to become really important and really vital to every office in the country. And so that is why it's important to know that HR now is a must-have as opposed to just a nice-to-have. And your malpractice carriers or your general liability carriers, a lot of you, your carriers will require you to have some of these things that we're going to talk about today. All right. So let's jump into the mistakes, right? So mistake number one is that many of you still either have an outdated or no handbook at all. And that is your first sort of error. And the reason is that although it's not the final document you need to have, it's one of many, it is a very important line of defense for your office. And so you need to have it because it's the first thing that a lawyer who's trying to sue you is going to look at, right? That's the very first thing, is whether you have an employment manual. Now, the formal kind of purpose, if you will, of a handbook is very simple. It's formal documentation that can serve as a tool for compliance down the road. And so if someone says, hey, I never got my lunches or breaks, or, you can point to your handbook and say, look, this is what you were offered and this is what you could use. And that, helps a lot. And then the second thing is it's an objective guideline to your workplace policies, right? So this is a way for you to be very objective about what you're putting out with regard to your policies, okay? And this is great because unlike some subjective, things that you may draft, your manual will be very objective and it'll be very, very clear, right? Very, very clear. So why is it important? Now, the consistency of having a manual helps you with legal protections for the practice, right? So first, it's a deterrent because if you have a manual, a lawyer now knows that you're following some set of rules as opposed to not having any rules at all, right? So that's kind of point number one. And the second point is that at the end of the day, the consistency by which you have to now abide by your own rules, prevents you from discrimination claims because if you're saying that, look, all your employees need to give you 2 weeks notice for paid time off or for vacation, and they don't, you have something that you can fall back on where if there are repercussions or if you have to deny them, you can do it, and you can do it consistently across all your employees as opposed to just maybe doing it for some of your employees and not others, and then playing favorites and whatnot. So this sort of inadvertent behavior that may be seen as unfair or discriminatory or prejudicial kind of goes away, right? So that's huge. And then the final benefit of having an employment manual is that it communicates your procedures and policies to your team members with complete transparency. Right, with complete transparency, because you're sending it to them via, let's say HR for Health, so it's going through electronically. You're documenting all your policies. They have to sign the policies in various places. So you're being very transparent about what the rules are, right? What the rules are. So these are the reasons why having, not just having a manual, but having an updated manual is really important. Now, what would I strongly urge you to avoid, because this is where the mistakes happen, are handbook templates, right? Handbook templates. Handbook templates can be good, if you're a dry cleaner, if you're a coffee shop, if you're a stamp collector. But if you're a professional dental medical office, right, you need to have your own handbook that's customized to you, right? It's customized to you. So what does that mean? That means that the payroll companies, they have templates that are generic and they use for all their businesses. So it won't have HIPAA and OSHA guidelines in there. It won't have all the things that you need, in terms of infection control and otherwise that a medical dental office needs. So don't use templates, right? Don't use templates. Now, there are people who have taken our templates, even though they're copyrighted, and have tried to pass it on as their own. And these folks are also making a mistake. These folks are consultants and others that are kind of taking this and pretending like it's theirs. Well, they're using manuals from different states that don't apply to the state that they're giving it out to, because they don't even know enough about HR to know that every state needs to have its own manual in many ways. And the rules are different. So just avoid templates, avoid getting it from your friends and your colleagues and all of that stuff. It's just not worth it. And especially because of what I'm about to say next. Usually people do this, right? They try to get templates, or they try to do because they think they have to spend so much money to get one. Well, historically, you're right. You may have to spend $4,000 or $5,000 on a lawyer to make one, or you go to one of these, handbook generation companies that are out there, these mom and pop organizations, and they maybe make you a handbook, and that might cost $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 and you have to sign a contract for a couple of years. You don't have to do any of that, right? There's no reason to do any of that, because you're getting the handbook for free every year as part of your membership with HR for Health. And it's customized to you. So it's not just a template, it's customized for you with your benefits, with everything that you want in your policy. It's in this handbook. We have an entire team of experts who work so hard on making sure that these books are strong for you. And that's why they can't just email it to you overnight and say, fill in the blanks, right? That's not the point, right? That's not the point. That doesn't keep you safe. So there's no excuse for you not to have a manual, because we're giving it to you for free, customized, so you have to do as little work as possible, other than telling us basically what your policies are, and then we do the heavy lifting. So not having a book is a handbook is really a bad idea, like really bad idea. Then you're just asking for trouble. It's like, not wearing a seatbelt and going 80 miles an hour down the freeway. Nothing may happen for a while, but one day something bad is going to happen and you're going to feel the pain. It's kind of like that. So just be careful with not having a handbook. But not updating your handbook is almost as bad, because if your policies are old, then they're not relevant and they're not applicable. So what's the point of having an old one? You really don't have an excuse with HR for Health, because we update it for you every year, and more importantly, it's customized to you. Okay, so quick tips for compliance: implement some written policies for sure. Make sure that all of your policies that you want are written. Have an HR specialist, help you put it together. Ideally, of course, you want it to be part of your, HR for Health team, because they'll do it as part of their service. And then make sure you're sending the handbook electronically to your team, and make sure they sign it electronically and back to you. The days of doing things on paper are long gone, right? I know some of us love paper. I love paper too. But when it comes to things like HR and employment manuals and new hire documents, you want it to all be electronic, so that nothing gets lost. If your office manager leaves or your HR person leaves, it's all sort of there. And then of course, you stay current with all the new rules and whatnot. These are things that, it's our job to update you, and we do as a member, so that what's coming up, whether it's, increases in minimum wage laws, to HR rules that are changing nationally or at the state or local level. Okay, all right, so that was mistake number one. That was a doozy, a very important one, but one to always keep in mind. All right, number two is not having a established process for recruitment and hiring and onboarding. Now, the reason this is important is because many of you have said, and complained about not being able to find the right team members or losing team members and things of that nature. Having this consistent system and process that you go ensures not only that hopefully you keep your best employees, of course, because they feel confident in your systems and in what you have, and they know what their policies are. But what really happens is that it keeps you compliant with all the laws, right? It keeps you compliant with all the laws, because you're not skipping steps, right? You're doing everything that you need to do from A to Z, right? Our new new hire forms, I should say, the mandatory ones are 12 to 17, roughly, depending on which state you are. But then there's like 20 other documents that you need to sign that are not technically mandated, but are highly, highly recommended to keep you safe. Well, it's almost impossible to keep track of that. And if you're a group practice, like you've got multiple locations, it's impossible for you to manage all of that, especially if you have multiple locations, right? It's impossible to know who's done what, when, and whether someone's returned a document. That's why a strict onboarding process where everything's tracked electronically, who's filled out things, who's viewed them, who's signed them. You know, all of that makes things so much easier for you. Okay, so what are some areas to look at as you kind of think about this? One is your job posts. What kind of job posts are you putting out there? Are you oozing with your practice personality in your job posts? Are you telling the world what kind of practice you are? If you're a fun practice and you want people to know that, make sure they know that in your job posts, right? Make that very clear to them. And then of course you need to also have the legal language that needs to be in there. The new hire checklist. If you don't have 12 to 17 documents per employee in your employee files right now, then you are completely out of compliance, and you need to make sure you get these documents for every single employee. Now remember, those are the mandatory ones. There's a lot more that are highly, highly recommended. As a lawyer, I recommend them because we want to minimize your liability across all different things. So it's not just what the state says is mandatory, but it's that plus a lot of other things. Okay, so again, really important. And then one new pitfall that seems to be happening more and more is, how do you screen the applicants, and how do you interview them, and what questions can you ask and not ask? This is becoming more of an issue recently in the last couple of years, because there's this sort of suspicion by a lot of employers, and you might be one of those where you're not sure if the person you're hiring is going to stay long term, or if they're a good candidate, or maybe they're working two jobs. Who knows, right? If you're hiring people remotely to do insurance work for you or whatnot, maybe they are working two jobs, and that's a violation of your policies. Well, that suspicion and that kind of feeling kind of comes out in these interviews, and sometimes we say things that we shouldn't say, or ask questions that we shouldn't ask. And so it's important to kind of follow a very systemized process when it comes to screening and interviewing and whatnot, so that you don't make those mistakes, right? You don't make those mistakes. So as we kind of finish mistake number 2, what I would say is the tips are: standardize your onboarding process. Make sure everybody you hire goes through the same exact process. Consider using HR for Health to help you with that, so that it's all documented in paperless fashion. You don't have to think twice about it, and the system will remind the employee to fill out and sign documents, and will tell you if they haven't, so that you can follow up with them. And then standardize your forms, right? If you have multiple offices, make sure every office is using very similar forms, as long as they're state compliant. If you have one office, same thing. Make sure you use the same forms for everyone. Don't recreate the wheel if you don't have to, right? Hugely important, hugely important. All right, let's go to mistake number 3, wage and hour compliance. Now, this is the number 1 lawsuit against doctors nationwide, is wage and hour. Now, some of you may say, well, what is wage and hour? Well, wage and hour is a really broad term that encompasses really a bunch of basic things. It encompasses how you pay your employee, when you pay your employee, what penalties you attach to their pay if you don't provide certain services, when do you give them lunches, when do you give them breaks, when do you give them their final pay, and how much can you take out for reimbursements and other kinds of things. That's the breadth of wage and hour, okay, for the most part. There's a couple of others, but that's sort of the breadth. Now, it's such a bad area of the law, with small businesses, especially in healthcare, that most insurance companies will not even touch it. There's exclusions for wage and hour because they know it's the number 1 lawsuit against you, right? So there's nothing to protect you other than being compliant and being on HR for Health. So that is your number 1 safety right there. Okay, so let's go into some detail about what we're talking about. So first is lunches and breaks. So in most states, not all, but in most states, you have to provide between 5 to 20 minutes of break, paid break, to your employees. This means that the employee has to be on the clock, but they are, they're completely relieved of all work, right? So they can, be looking at their phone, they can be taking, water, they can have a snack, whatever. Going to the bathroom, by the way, is not considered a break. So this is on top of going to the restroom. And then in most states, you have to provide at least a 30-minute lunch. Now, again, it's not all states. Some states you don't have to provide any lunch. You can just starve your employees to death. But in other states, in most states, you have to provide at least a 30-minute lunch, and that is unpaid, so they clock out. But they do have to be relieved of all duties. Okay, so that those are sort of the basics, and every state is a little bit different. Sometimes localities are a little bit different. Now there are some misunderstandings because some states follow what's called the federal rule. Very few states, but some states follow the federal rule, and the federal rule is that there is no rule when it comes to breaks and lunches. And so you have to kind of be a little bit careful because some websites and some folks say, oh, so and so state is a federal state, so you don't have to worry about lunches and breaks. But then they forget that the city or the county or sometimes the state itself has changed the rules or put restrictions on the lunches and the breaks for certain certain industries or certain number of businesses with certain number of employees. And so then you do have to provide it, but no one's told you that. So again, hugely important. Okay, so I know most of you may think you're doing this correctly, but it's important to always double check to make sure you're giving them their breaks on time, you're giving them their lunches on time, you're not skimping on all of that. Okay, the next stage is overtime. Now, overtime means that if an employee works more than 8 hours in a day or 40 hours in a week, that's the rule in a few states. Some states it's just 40 hours in the week, so they don't have a daily rule. But if they work more than those hours, then they need to be paid time and a half. Okay, they need to be paid time and a half. This applies to really all non-exempt employees. So that basically includes everyone in your office, except potentially your office manager, if they're like a true office manager and they fit that test. Or if they're a doctor associate, they may also be exempt. Okay, they may also be exempt. So just kind of keep that in mind. They do have to fit into certain rules, to be exempt. If they're an office manager or if they're a doctor associate. But those folks may not, you may not be required to pay them overtime. Per diem employees, however, do need to be paid. So if you're paying someone a daily rate, $300, $400, $500 a day to show up and work, that employee, no matter whether they're a doctor associate or an office manager or whatever, will probably need to be paid overtime. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. And then one very common error is non-discretionary bonuses have to be added to the rate of pay when calculating overtime. Okay, so what is a non-discretionary bonus? That's a bonus that the employees know what they're getting, right? So they know how to earn it, they know how to get it paid, they know when they're being paid. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, all right. The next aspect of inaccurate timekeeping is, or as a mistake is wage and hour, is inaccurate timekeeping. And so what I mean by this is that there's a lot of time clocks out there that people are using that are not, really handling some of these items correctly. So some people, they're using time clocks and clocking out for their breaks, but remember that needs to be paid. The lunches don't have to be paid, so that's important to keep in mind. These are little changes that need to occur. Now, the biggest hang up when it comes to timekeeping is changes to the time. If your employees are anything like mine, they have changes all the time. They forget to clock in, they forget to clock out, so there's always some change that needs to happen. Well, if you are making the change as the owner or the office manager, that could be a big problem because the employees could claim that you did it in an unauthorized way. Okay, so that could be a huge problem. So you want to make sure that what you're doing is you have a system like HR4Health where the employee makes the change, it notifies you as the owner or the office manager, and then you review it and then verify whether you accept or deny depending on the situation. That is all date stamped, time stamped, all of that, so there's no risk to anybody. But if you do it for them, because they text you or they told you something or passed you a note, those things can get lost, of course, and then you're in trouble because you changed their time, and that's illegal. So here are some tips. Offer and pay for all required, rest breaks. Make sure that they're taking their lunches on time. Remember, lunches have to be taken usually at a certain time during the day. They can't be taken at the end of the day or in the beginning of the day. Use an electronic time system. Please use an electronic time system. Right now, a lot of benefits, sick time, PTO, 401k even requires, electronic timekeeping. So make sure you're doing that. And then please store all documents, breaks, PTOs, all of that stuff needs to be stored and needs to be tracked carefully, so that nothing gets lost. Okay, hugely, hugely important. Okay, all right, let's go to mistake number 4. So here are some policies that we sometimes see that our doctors have that carry risk. Okay, so these are things that you have in place that you really shouldn't have in place, but we do see these errors. So I'm going to go through them really quickly. So one is, remember when your final paycheck is due, right? If you're going to pay someone because you fired them or they resigned, every state has slightly different rules about the final paycheck, when it must be paid. And so it's important to know what those rules are so that you can pay them on time. Every day that you don't pay them on time after the time period that the state has designated sometimes has very steep penalties. Okay, so make sure you know what those rules are as soon as someone resigns or quits. Okay, any PTO that they haven't used, any vacation time, and sometimes even sick leave must be paid out. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, so sick leave in some states doesn't need to be paid out, but PTO and vacation always do. But some states do have rules about sick time as well. Okay, and then like I mentioned, the penalties for non-compliance on these is really, really, really steep. Okay, now terminating employees without documentation is a huge risk, and we highly discourage it. In fact, we encourage every one of our clients at HR4Health who's terminating an employee to call us first and walk through it with our team members. It's part of the service, it's free. And the reason we do that is because we want to make sure that that you're not terminating somebody you shouldn't be terminating. And our HR team finds situations all the time where if the doctor hadn't called and they would have fired somebody that they should not have fired and would have likely gotten sued. So we have been able to save tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of penalties and lawsuits and whatnot because of this. So hugely important. We have a lot of clients who also misunderstand the at-will relationship and what that means. Most states are at will, but it doesn't mean that you can fire anybody at any time. There are some restrictions on that, as I just mentioned. So anytime you want to do that, please be careful, because if they're old, if they're pregnant, they're disabled or injured, those are things that prevent you from terminating an employee. Okay, so tips for compliance here are very simple. Pay final paychecks on time. Know the rules in and out. As soon as someone resigns or quits, let them know, right? Let them know what those rules are. Figure it out and then do it. Document all your conversations that you have with your employees and make sure that is it's somewhere that it won't get lost. It's incredible how quickly employee files disappear when someone feels like they're going to be fired or they're going to quit. And then talk to an HR professional or a lawyer before you fire someone. And again, if you're an HR4Health customer, and I hope you all become that, what you'll see is that our HR team is there for you basically 24/7, waiting to help you through these serious issues. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. All right, we're almost to the end. All right, so let's talk about mistake number 5. Mistake number 5, not keeping up with law updates. So what are we talking about here? So laws are changing all the time. And pre-COVID, we used to expect laws to change basically once a year. The legislatures of the states or Congress would pass various things, and then they would go into effect in January of every year. And so there was plenty of time to kind of prepare for it and do what we needed to do. Since COVID, things have changed drastically. Laws are changing left and right at the state level, at the local level, at the county level, at the federal level. I mean, things are changing all the time, and they're changing really, really rapidly. And so things, you need to be aware of these, and it's almost a full-time job. I mean, there are healthcare lawyers who aren't able to keep this up and provide old information or bad information. We've run across that. So it's really important to rely on HR for Health for that information. And I'll give you a quick example that just happened recently. As many of you know, many states are increasing their minimum wage rules, right? So how much you can pay someone is changing because of various rules that have been in place and been enacted for many years. So those rules are coming in place, right? States that were paying $8 or $9 an hour are now paying $10 an hour or $11 an hour or $12 an hour. Well, those states are now about to change those again, right? But in the middle of the change that they passed the first time. So they're still in the middle of the law that they passed many years ago, but they're thinking about increasing it even further because of what's happened in the last couple of years with regard to inflation. So inflation has really caused a downward pressure on this, and so the value of those minimum wage laws that had been passed 2-3 years ago is now being discounted, and so they're thinking about raising them again. Well, if you don't know that, if you're not up to speed on that, then it's going to throw off a lot of the things that you're doing. Now, you might say, Ali, I'm paying way more than minimum wage. I wish I was paying minimum wage. I'm paying $16, $17, $18 an hour, and so I'm in no fear of that. Well, there are a lot of rules that are attached to minimum wage laws that you may not be aware of, other than their actual wages that do matter, right? That do matter. So it's really important that you make sure you don't have any outdated policies, right? You don't have any outdated policies. And that's why one of the first things that our HR team does when you sign on as a customer is we go through and make sure that your policies are not outdated. If you have any that are outdated while you're doing your employment manual, we help you update those. Because things like this, retirement plans are being passed nationwide that you need to provide to your employees. Family leave laws are changing. COVID mandates are still happening. I mean, I know we're all sick of COVID. We have been for a while, but still rapidly expanding throughout the country, and there's still laws in place with regard to that. Harassment laws, discrimination laws are being changed all the time, to help people. Pre-COVID, it was the Me Too movement and women's rights that has kind of quieted down and been kind of surpassed by mental health issues, not because there's not harassment for women's rights. Of course, there's still that happening, but now we have a new thing that the states are focusing on. So laws are changing all the time, and some Me Too movement laws are still changing, but they don't get the press anymore that they used to. So we just don't know about it. So you just have to be really careful, right? You have to be really careful. And then the federal government is getting involved with in the EEO and the rules there. So again, just really, really crucial that you keep up with all of these rules. Now, some things that cause some issues still to this day, even though some states have had these rules for many years, are state mandated sick leaves. Many states have their own rules. You have to know what the difference between sick leave and a PTO is, which is paid time off. And then make sure that you know whether your city or county has their own rules. I'll give you a perfect example. Here in California, this small city called West Hollywood in Los Angeles has its own sick leave law. Why West Hollywood needs its own sick leave law, I have no idea. But they do, and they've passed it, and so everybody in West Hollywood needs to be aware of that. Same thing happened a few years ago with this small town in Northern California called Emeryville. I mean, there's like nothing in Emeryville other than like an IKEA, and it has its own rules, right? It has its own sick leave rules. Why Emeryville needs its own rules, I have no idea, but they do, right? But they do. So my point is, you have to be very careful, because if you're not, these are, again, potentially tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of penalties and fines that could come out. So just be aware. You have a full-time job. Rely on HR for Health to help you kind of do this and keep up with it. Okay. All right. So keeping up, in terms of tips, make sure you separate your sick leave and PTO policies if you need to. Usually we recommend either having a PTO policy or having a vacation/sick leave policy, but not necessarily both. And then have some system or whatnot that you're relying on for information. Okay, so as we end today, what can we do to help? I mean, I've been talking to you a lot about what HR for Health does throughout this presentation, as we've been going through these things. So we're here to support you A to Z. But remember, at the end of the day, the ultimate responsibility is yours. My job is to just provide you with the information and educate you, and hope that you take this seriously enough that you don't have to call our law firm to help you navigate a lawsuit or a demand letter. Yes, we can be successful, but at what cost, right? And that's the goal. Is it's not about being successful at the end of a lawsuit. We can do that, and we do that all the time. But if you have to spend $100,000, $200,000 to be successful, were you really successful, right? If you spend a couple $100s a month, you can avoid potentially a lot of this. And that's one of the reasons why, we created HR for Health, a long time ago, to make sure that you get your handbook, you get your payroll, you get your HR support, you get your documentation, your time clock, and your performance management. You get it all in one electronic package, so that you don't have to worry about HR. You can just focus on the patients and let HR be handled by us and by your team, whether it's an office manager, an office administrator, or otherwise. So if you're interested in hearing more about it and seeing if it's a good fit for your practice, of course, there's no pressure, just a matter of, is it a good fit for what you need, and can we support you? If so, great. If not, we'll give you any advice you want, but we part as friends. We're here to serve you, and we have for many years. That's why many state associations trust us. That's why many consultants trust us. Many banks trust us. It's because of the fact that we are all about service. If you take your phones out, you can take a picture of this QR code on your screen, and you'll get a link that allows you to schedule a time with one of our team members to learn a little bit more about HR for Health. So please take advantage of that. And so I want to thank you guys very much for today. Sasha, did we get any questions from anybody while I've been going through this webinar?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions. Well, first of all, thank you so much for your wisdom, Ollie. It's definitely critical that our viewers watch out for these pitfalls, know how to handle them, and definitely prevent them in the future. And I also wanted to provide our lucky viewers here today with a free guide to help you through HR emergencies in the future. And I do have that link, and I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. But while I go ahead and put that in the chat, Ollie, one of the questions that came up was, what if an employee refuses to sign the employee handbook? What then?
Fire them. No, I'm just kidding. No, so it depends on who it is that is refusing to sign. If you have a new employee that you're hiring that is refusing to sign your employment manual, then you can, if you've done the offer letter correctly, you don't have to hire them. Okay, so one of the things that you can make is contingent on their hiring is for them to review and sign the employment manual. So that's an easy one. Now, if you have an existing employee who you are, that you're having sign their manual because maybe you've updated the manual or changed the manual, again, you should have a conversation with that employee. Try to find out if they're refusing, why they're refusing. Is there something about the manual they don't understand? Is there something that concerns them? Go through that interactive process with them so that you really understand why, because there shouldn't be anything in the manual that upsets them to the point where they're refusing to sign. Now, if they do refuse and they don't have a really good reason, then you can end their employment at that point. But again, as I mentioned, before you do, you want to talk to a lawyer or HR for Health before you do that, so that we can kind of walk you through it to make sure it's not done incorrectly.
Awesome, thank you, Ollie. And then we also have, I think, time for one more question today. So this question is with regards to meal breaks. So what should I do if my employees are stubborn about taking their meal breaks on time?
Yeah, great question. So meal breaks are something that in most states cannot be waived. And what I mean by that is that under certain circumstances, like if somebody works less than like 6 hours or whatnot, they can maybe waive their meal. But I'm talking about someone who's working like an 8-hour day, right? Which is most typically, applies to most of you. If someone refuses consistently to not take their meal breaks, it's important that you first sit down with them and have a conversation about the importance of it. Make sure you're documenting it somewhere. And then if it continues to happen, then you have to write them up. And the reason is that is a performance issue because they're not abiding by your employment manual. Now, if they continue to do that, eventually you could let them go. Now, if someone's consistently doing that, although it may seem like they're doing it to help the business or they're working hard or whatnot, but really what we see is that they're really setting you up for a lawsuit in the future because there are very strict rules, as I mentioned, that cannot be waived with regard to lunches and breaks, and employees need to take them. And if they don't, you owe them potentially a penalty fee. Usually it's about an hour's worth of wage or some other number that you have to pay them every time they miss their lunch or their break. So if you catch it, which you should, because you should be looking at your time clocks every 2 weeks when you're running payroll, but make sure you don't let it slide. Write them up. Do it informally first. It might just be inadvertent, and then as it gets more and more serious, make it more of a formal write-up.
Awesome. We definitely get those questions all the time, so that was a great question. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ollie, and thank you to all our viewers that have joined us today to learn about the top 5 HR compliance mistakes that you can make out of practice. If we did not get to your question, please rest assured that we will reach out to you separately to make sure that your questions are answered. Feel free to reach out to us at any time, and thank you all again for coming, and we hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you, Sasha. Bye, everyone.